My wife Julia came home at midnight smelling like another man's cologne and had the audacity to ask me how my day went. That's when I knew our marriage was circling the drain faster than water in a broken garbage disposal. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Fine, I said, not looking up from my laptop where I was debugging code for the 1,000th time that week. Marriage is like software, full of bugs, needs constant updates, and you don't really get what you paid for. I'm Nathan Booker, 38 years old, and I manage IT systems for a mid-sized insurance company in Dallas. Not glamorous, but it pays for our house in the suburbs and Julia's expensive taste in everything. Julia kicked off her heels and flopped onto our leather couch with dramatic flair. Everything she did was dramatic these days. I had drinks with Marissa after showing that property on Elm Street. You know, the one with the pool? I knew she was lying because Marissa had posted Instagram stories all evening from her book club meeting, but I didn't call her out. Not yet. In my line of work, you learn to gather evidence before making accusations. Sounds fun, I said, still typing. Did you close the deal? Not yet, but I'm optimistic. She stretched like a cat, which used to drive me wild. Now it just looked calculated. I'm going to shower. As soon as I heard the water running, I checked her purse. Call it paranoia, call it intuition, but something felt wrong. Hidden beneath her makeup bag was a hotel keycard from the Marriott downtown, the same hotel where she claimed to have never been. The next morning, Julia was already gone when I woke up. She'd left a note saying she had an early showing, but her real estate calendar on the kitchen iPad was completely empty. I screenshotted it before she could delete the evidence. At work, my colleague Eddie Martinez noticed my mood immediately. Eddie's one of those guys who can read people like source code. Clean, logical, and brutally honest. You look like someone deleted your backup files, Eddie said, rolling his chair over to my cubicle. What's eating you? Julia's acting strange. Coming home late, weird excuses, the whole cheating wife playbook. Eddie whistled low. Man, that sucks. You sure you're not just being paranoid? I showed him the hotel keycard photo on my phone. Found this in her purse last night. Okay, that's not paranoid. That's evidence. Eddie leaned back in his chair. What are you going to do about it? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Julia. Having lunch with Marissa. Don't wait up for dinner. Love you. Except Marissa had just posted on Facebook about spending the day at her mother's house in Fort Worth. The lies were getting sloppy, which meant Julia was getting careless. In my experience, careless people make mistakes, and mistakes leave digital footprints. That evening, I decided to do some reconnaissance. I parked across from Marissa's apartment complex and waited. Sure enough, at 7:30, Julia's white BMW pulled up. But instead of going to Marissa's door, she walked to a black pickup truck in the visitor parking. The man who got out was tall, muscular, and familiar in a way that made my stomach clench. Derek Miller, Deke, Julia's high school boyfriend who'd moved back to Dallas 6 months ago. I'd heard about his return through the neighborhood gossip network, but Julia had never mentioned running into him. They embraced like lovers, not old friends catching up. His hands lingered on her lower back, and she tilted her face up to his in a way she hadn't looked at me in years. I took photos with my phone's zoom feature, making sure to capture their faces clearly. When I got home, Julia was already there, humming in the kitchen while she made herself a salad. How was lunch with Marissa? I asked casually. Great. We went to that new place on Bishop Street, the one with the amazing salmon. She didn't even look up from chopping tomatoes. Sounds delicious. Did you two talk about anything interesting? Julia finally glanced at me, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt? Fear? Just girl stuff. You know how it is. I knew exactly how it was. She was cheating, lying about it, and treating me like an idiot who wouldn't figure it out. But I'm not the type to make a scene without a plan. In programming, we call it debugging. You identify the problem, trace the source, and then implement a solution. 2 days later, Julia delivered the line that would change everything. We were eating breakfast when she casually said, "My ex wants to meet me this weekend. No need for you to hear the details." I looked up from my coffee, meeting her eyes directly. Which ex? Does it matter? It's just coffee to catch up on old times. I suppose it doesn't matter, I said, keeping my voice level. Fine. She seemed surprised by my calm reaction. Fine? Fine. Have coffee with your ex. Catch up on old times. Do whatever you need to do. Julia studied my face, probably looking for signs of jealousy or anger. She found neither because I'd already moved past those emotions into something much more dangerous: cold, calculated fury. "Okay, then," she said slowly. "I'm glad you're being mature about this." Mature. Right. What she didn't know was that I'd already started planning my response. Our anniversary trip to Napa Valley was supposed to happen next month. I'd booked a romantic bed and breakfast, made dinner reservations at her favorite restaurant, even arranged for couples massage appointments. After she left for work, I canceled everything. Every reservation, every romantic gesture, every expensive surprise I'd planned. The cancellation fees alone cost me $800, but it was worth it to see the look on her face when she found out. But that was just the beginning. Julia's coffee date turned into a 4-hour afternoon disappearance. She came home glowing like she'd just won the lottery, which in a way she probably thought she had. There's nothing quite like the rush of new romance, even when it's built on betrayal and lies. "How was coffee?" I asked from my spot on the couch, where I'd been waiting with my laptop open to a very interesting Facebook profile. "Nice. We talked about high school, mutual friends, you know." She was practically bouncing on her toes. "Deke's doing really well for himself. He owns an auto shop now." Deke. So she was admitting to seeing Derek Miller, at least partially. Progress, in a twisted way. "That's great," I said, clicking through photos of Derek's custom car business. "I'm happy for him." Julia seemed deflated by my lack of reaction. You're not upset?" "Why would I be upset about you having coffee with an old friend?" "Because that's all it was, right? Just coffee with an old friend who happened to look like he stepped out of a fitness magazine and owned a successful business. Just coffee with the guy she'd lost her virginity to at 17 and compared every other man to for the next 20 years. "Right. Exactly. Just old friends." She headed toward the stairs. "I'm going to take a bath." While she soaked in lavender bubbles, probably fantasizing about her afternoon with Deke, I did what any reasonable husband would do. I hacked into her laptop. Okay, hacked is a strong word. She'd left it open on the kitchen counter with her email pulled up. I'm not a criminal mastermind. I'm just married to someone who's terrible at operational security. The emails between Julia and Derek went back 3 weeks. 3 weeks of increasingly intimate messages that made my stomach turn and my anger crystallize into something sharp and focused. "I can't stop thinking about prom night," one message read. "Do you remember what you did to me in the back of your dad's Camaro?" Derek's response was even worse. "I remember everything. The way you tasted, the sounds you made, how you begged me not to stop. I've been dreaming about doing it again." I forwarded the entire email chain to my personal account, then cleared the browser history so Julia wouldn't know I'd seen it. Evidence collected, archived, and ready for deployment when the time was right. The next morning, Julia announced she was having a girls' night out with Marissa on Friday. Another lie, but I was starting to appreciate the predictability of her deception. Cheaters follow patterns, and Julia was no exception. "Sounds fun," I said. "I'll probably work late anyway. We've got that server migration project." "Perfect. Don't wait up for me. We might make it a late night." Oh, I was sure she would. Friday evening, I told Julia I was heading to the office, but instead I drove to Eddie's house. He lived in an apartment complex with a perfect view of the Marriott hotel parking lot. Coincidence? Maybe. But I prefer to think of it as strategic positioning. "This is either going to be really boring or really devastating," Eddie said, handing me a beer and a pair of binoculars. "You sure you want to see whatever's about to happen?" "I need to see it," I said. "I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." We didn't have to wait long. At 8:15, Julia's BMW pulled into the hotel parking lot. At 8:20, Derek's black pickup truck followed. They met at the side entrance, and even from a distance, their body language told the whole story. The way he put his hand on her lower back to guide her inside. The way she leaned into him like she belonged there. "Jesus, Nate. I'm sorry, man." Eddie lowered his own binoculars. "That's pretty damning." It's exactly what I expected. And it was. Seeing it still felt like a punch to the gut, but I'd prepared myself for this moment. Now I know for sure. They stayed inside for 2.5 hours. When they finally emerged, Julia's hair was messed up and Derek's shirt was wrinkled. He kissed her goodbye in the parking lot. Not a friendly peck, but a deep, passionate kiss that lasted long enough for me to take several clear photos. I drove home and was pretending to work on my laptop when Julia walked in at midnight, smelling like hotel soap and sex. "How was girls' night?" I asked without looking up. "Great. We went to that new wine bar downtown. Marissa got a little too drunk, so I had to drive her home." She was getting better at the details. I'd give her that. "That was nice of you. Did you have fun?" "Yeah, it was exactly what I needed." She stretched, and I noticed a small bruise on her collarbone that definitely wasn't there that morning. I'm exhausted, though, going straight to bed. After she went upstairs, I opened my laptop and began planning phase 2 of my response. If Julia wanted to play games, I was happy to oblige, but she was about to learn that I was much better at this than she was. I started by creating a fake social media profile using photos of Eddie's attractive cousin Maria, who lived in Phoenix. Maria had agreed to let me use her pictures after Eddie explained the situation. Then I checked in at Dallas Love Field Airport and posted a selfie with the caption, "Spontaneous weekend trip? Sometimes you just need an adventure." Within an hour, Julia had seen the post. I knew because she suddenly appeared in the living room wearing her sexiest pajamas. "I thought you were exhausted," I said, not looking up from my laptop. "I couldn't sleep. Who was that woman in your photo?" "What photo?" "The one from the airport, with that pretty brunette." I glanced at my phone like I'd forgotten about it. "Oh, that's Maria. She's a consultant working on our server project. We had to fly to Phoenix for an emergency client meeting." Julia's face went through several expressions: surprise, suspicion, and something that looked suspiciously like jealousy. "You didn't mention any business trip?" "It came up last minute. You were already out having fun with Marissa, so I didn't want to bother you." I closed my laptop and stood up. I should get some sleep. Early flight back tomorrow. "Wait," Julia grabbed my arm. "How long have you been working with this Maria?" "A few weeks. Why?" "She's very pretty." I hadn't noticed. I pulled free from her grip. "Good night, Julia." As I walked upstairs, I could feel her staring at me. For the first time in months, I had her full attention. Funny how that worked. Ignore a cheating spouse, and suddenly they remember you exist. But this was just the opening move. I had much bigger plans for Derek Miller and my lying wife. Julia spent the entire weekend stalking my social media and asking casual questions about Maria. It was almost cute, watching her try to figure out if I was cheating too. The irony wasn't lost on me. She could dish it out, but couldn't handle even the possibility of taking it. "So, this Maria," she said over Sunday morning coffee, "is she married?" "I don't know. We don't really talk about personal stuff." I turned the page of my newspaper, the picture of domestic tranquility. "Why?" "Just curious. You two seemed friendly in that photo." "We're colleagues, Julia. Professional friendliness is part of the job." She didn't look convinced, which was exactly what I wanted. Let her stew in uncertainty for a while. Let her wonder if her boring IT manager husband was more interesting than she'd thought. Monday morning brought a new development. I was at my desk when Eddie rolled over with a shit-eating grin. "Dude, you're not going to believe this. My neighbor Lauren is married to some guy named Derek Miller. Apparently he owns an auto shop, and she's been complaining about him working late and acting sketchy." Lauren Miller. Derek's wife. I'd seen her mentioned in his Facebook profile, but hadn't made the connection to Eddie's neighbor. "Really? That's interesting?" "More than interesting. She was asking me if I knew any good private investigators because she thinks he's cheating." Eddie leaned closer. "Want me to introduce you two?" It was like the universe was handing me the perfect ally on a silver platter. "That might be helpful," I said carefully. "Maybe we can help each other out." That evening, Eddie arranged for me to, accidentally, run into Lauren at the coffee shop near his apartment. She was exactly what I'd expected. Sharp, attractive, and radiating the kind of cold fury that comes from knowing your spouse is betraying you. "So, you're Nathan," she said, after Eddie made introductions and conveniently disappeared to take a phone call. "Eddie mentioned you might be dealing with a similar situation." "Possibly. What makes you think Derek is cheating?" Lauren's laugh was bitter. "Late nights, mysterious phone calls, new cologne, and a sudden interest in working out. Plus, he's been talking about some woman from his high school days. Julia something." "Julia Booker," I said quietly. "That's the name. You know her?" "She's my wife." Lauren stared at me for a long moment, then started laughing. Not happy laughter, the kind that comes when life gets so absurd you can't process it any other way. "Well, this is perfect," she said finally. "Our spouses are screwing each other, and we're sitting here comparing notes like some kind of support group. It gets better. I have photos of them together at the Marriott. And I have credit card statements showing he paid for the room." Lauren pulled out her phone. "Want to see Derek's browser history. He's been looking up romantic restaurants and weekend getaway packages." We spent the next hour sharing intelligence like a couple of CIA operatives. Lauren was thorough, methodical, and absolutely ruthless in her fact-gathering. I was impressed and slightly intimidated. "So what's the plan?" she asked as we prepared to leave. "I was thinking we could confront them publicly, and make it impossible for them to deny or minimize what they've been doing." "I like the way you think, Nathan, But I want to do more than just embarrass them. I want to salt the earth, make them both regret the day they decided to betray us. Lauren Miller was definitely my kind of ally. We arranged to meet again the next day to plan our strategy. But first, I had some reconnaissance to do. Julia had mentioned she was showing a property downtown Thursday evening, another lie, according to her real estate calendar, which meant she was probably meeting Derek again. Sure enough, at 6:30 Thursday evening, I watched from my car as Julia and Derek entered the same hotel bar where I'd seen them before. They were holding hands now, not even trying to hide their relationship. The audacity was breathtaking. I texted Lauren. "They're at the Marriott bar. You ready for this?" Her response came immediately. "On my way. Let's do this." Lauren arrived 10 minutes later, looking like she was dressed for war in a sharp black dress and heels that could double as weapons. Together, we walked into the hotel bar where my wife and her lover were sharing intimate conversation and expensive wine. "Well, well," Lauren said loudly enough to turn heads. "Look what we have here." Julia's face went white when she saw me. Derek had the decency to look guilty for about 2 seconds before his expression shifted to defiance. "Nathan, I can explain," Julia started. "Explain what? How you've been lying to me for weeks? How you've been sneaking around with a married man?" I kept my voice calm, which somehow made it more devastating than if I'd been shouting. "And Derek," Lauren continued, her voice dripping with contempt, "I'm sure you can explain why our joint credit card shows charges for hotel rooms and romantic dinners while you've been telling me you're working late." The entire bar was watching now. Other patrons had their phones out, probably recording what was clearly about to become a very public domestic drama. "Lauren, honey, let's talk about this at home." Derek started to stand. "Sit down," Lauren snapped. "We're talking about it right here, right now, in front of everyone." She grabbed Derek's wine glass and threw the contents in his face. The red wine splashed across his white shirt and dripped onto the floor. Then, before anyone could react, I snatched Derek's car keys from the table and dropped them into the decorative fish tank behind the bar. "Oops," I said mildly. "Butterfingers." The crowd was openly staring now, some people applauding. Julia looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "You're both pathetic," Lauren announced to the room. "Cheating spouses who can't even be honest about their betrayal." We walked out together, leaving Julia and Derek to deal with the aftermath. Derek was still dripping wine and trying to fish his keys out of the tank while Julia sat frozen in humiliation. "That felt good," Lauren said as we reached the parking lot. "That was just the opening act," I replied. "Wait until you see what I have planned for the encore." The war had officially begun, and Derek Miller had no idea what he was up against. The hotel bar confrontation was just the beginning. Over the next week, Julia tried everything to get back in my good graces, cooking elaborate dinners, wearing sexy lingerie to bed, even suggesting we take that anniversary trip to Napa after all. "I made a mistake, Nathan," she said one morning over breakfast that she'd actually cooked instead of grabbing a protein bar on her way out. "It was just a stupid moment of weakness. It didn't mean anything." Which part didn't mean anything? The weeks of lying, the hotel rooms, or the part where you told me your ex wanted to meet you and I didn't need to hear the details? Julia flinched. "I know how it looks. It looks like you've been having an affair and only care now because you got caught." "That's not true. I care about our marriage. I care about you." I looked at her across the table, this woman I'd been married to for 8 years, who I'd thought I knew completely. "If you cared about our marriage, you wouldn't have been screwing Derek Miller at the Marriott twice a week." She started crying then, but they felt like calculated tears, the kind meant to manipulate rather than express genuine remorse. "I'll stop seeing him. I'll block his number. Whatever you want." "What I want is for you to have thought about that before you started this whole mess." But Julia's promises were meaningless anyway, because Derek had other plans. 3 days after the bar incident, I came home to find my garage had been broken into. My tools were scattered across the floor, my workbench was overturned, and someone had spray-painted "asshole" across my car's windshield. The security camera I'd installed last month caught everything. Derek Miller, clear as day, using a crowbar to break into my garage and systematically destroying my stuff. He'd even left a note tucked under my windshield wiper. "Stay away from my business, or next time it'll be worse." I called Lauren immediately. "He's escalating," she said after I sent her the video footage. "Derek doesn't handle humiliation well, never has." "Good thing I handle it just fine. In fact, I'm about to give him a masterclass in public embarrassment." I uploaded the security footage to our neighborhood's Facebook group with the caption, "When your wife's boyfriend can't handle rejection. Anyone recognize this guy?" Within an hour, it had 50 comments and 20 shares. By evening, half the subdivision knew that Derek Miller was not only a cheater, but also a vandal who destroyed other people's property when he got his feelings hurt. The neighborhood watch captain, Mr. Torres, even commented, "This is exactly why we need better security measures. Some people have no respect for other people's property or marriages." Julia was mortified when she saw the post. "You're making this public, Nathan. Everyone will know about us." "Everyone already knows, Julia. The only difference is now they know what kind of man you chose to cheat with." But Derek wasn't done. 2 days later, he showed up at my office building. I was walking to my car after work when he stepped out from behind a pillar in the parking garage. "We need to talk," he said, trying to look intimidating in his tight t-shirt and designer jeans. "I don't think we do. But if you want to have another public meltdown, I'm happy to oblige." "You think you're smart posting that video online? Making me look bad?" "I didn't make you look bad, Derek. You did that all by yourself when you decided to break into my garage like some kind of teenage delinquent." He stepped closer, clearly trying to use his size to intimidate me. Derek was taller and more muscular, but I had something he didn't. 3 years of boxing lessons at the gym downtown. "You embarrassed me in front of the whole neighborhood." "You embarrassed yourself. I just provided the documentation." "Julia doesn't love you anymore. She told me so. She said you're boring and predictable and she can't wait to get away from you." That stung, even though I'd suspected as much, but I kept my expression neutral. If that's true, then she's free to file for divorce. Until then, she's still my wife, and you're still a married man sneaking around like a teenager. Derek's face flushed red. "You don't deserve her." "Maybe not, but you definitely don't deserve your wife. Lauren's worth 10 of Julia, and you threw that away for what? A few hotel room hookups with your high school girlfriend?" That hit home. Derek's hands clenched into fists, and for a moment I thought he might actually throw a punch. Instead, he got in his truck and peeled out of the parking garage, leaving rubber marks on the concrete. But I wasn't done with Derek Miller, not by a long shot. The next weekend, I put Phase 3 of my plan into action. Derek spent every Saturday morning at Knockout Boxing Gym, trying to maintain the physique that had attracted Julia in the first place. What he didn't know was that I'd been training at the same gym for 3 years, usually in the evenings when he wasn't there. I showed up Saturday morning and signed up for a sparring session. The gym owner, Big Mike, was happy to pair me with Derek after I explained we had some personal issues to work out. "You sure about this, Nate?" Mike asked quietly. "That guy's got 40 pounds on you." "I'm sure. Sometimes you have to face your problems head on." Derek looked surprised when he saw me in the ring, but he couldn't back down without looking like a coward in front of the other guys. "This is stupid," he said as we touched gloves. "I don't want to hurt you. Don't worry about me, Derek. I can take care of myself." For the first minute, Derek tried to use his size advantage, throwing heavy punches and trying to corner me. But boxing isn't just about strength. It's about technique, timing, and endurance. Derek was strong, but he was also sloppy and overconfident. I let him tire himself out throwing wild haymakers, then started picking him apart with precise body shots. By the third round, he was breathing hard, and his punches were losing steam. "Getting tired?" I asked during a clinch. "Maybe you should spend less time in hotel rooms and more time in the gym." That made him angry, which made him careless. He dropped his guard for just a second, and I caught him with a perfect left hook to the solar plexus. Derek doubled over, gasping for air, and Big Mike called the match. "Good work, Nate," Mike said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Clean technique beats raw power every time." Derek was still trying to catch his breath, his face red with exertion and humiliation. The other guys in the gym were looking at him with a mixture of amusement and pity. "You hit like a real estate agent," I told Derek as I climbed out of the ring. "Maybe stick to what you're good at." The video of our sparring match, courtesy of the gym's security cameras, found its way onto social media by that evening. Lauren had connections everywhere, and she wasn't shy about using them. But Derek's humiliation was far from over. In fact, we were just getting started. Julia's attempts at reconciliation became increasingly desperate as our neighborhood turned against her. The grocery store cashier who used to chat about her real estate deals now barely made eye contact. Our neighbors stopped inviting her to their barbecues and book clubs. Even her own real estate office was buzzing with gossip about her affair. "This has to stop, Nathan," she said one evening after a particularly awkward encounter at the mailbox with Mrs. Patterson, who'd made a point of asking loudly about Derek's vandalism problem. "What has to stop? People finding out who you really are? You're destroying my reputation. My career depends on people trusting me." "Then you should have thought about that before you started screwing a married man in hotel rooms." Julia's face crumpled, but I was past caring about her tears. "I made a mistake. You made a choice. Multiple choices. For weeks. and the only reason you want to stop now is because there are consequences. But while Julia was spiraling, Derek was getting more dangerous. Lauren had reported that he'd been drinking heavily and talking about teaching me a lesson. She'd also discovered something interesting while going through his business records. Derek's auto shop is in financial trouble, she told me during one of our strategy meetings at Eddie's apartment. He owes money to some very unpleasant people. I think that's part of why he's been so aggressive. He's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, I said. Let's give him an opportunity to make a big one. The plan we came up with was elegant in its simplicity. Lauren would accidentally let slip to Derek that I was planning to take Julia on a romantic weekend getaway to a cabin in East Texas. She'd mentioned the specific location and time, making it sound like she'd overheard me on the phone. Meanwhile, I'd actually be setting up a much different kind of surprise. The cabin Lauren mentioned was owned by her cousin, who was happy to let us use it for our purposes. I arrived Friday afternoon and spent several hours preparing. Motion-activated cameras, speakers connected to my phone, and a few other surprises that would make Derek's inevitable arrival very memorable. Sure enough, Derek took the bait. At 10:30 that night, his pickup truck pulled up the gravel driveway. I watched from my hiding spot in the woods as he crept toward the cabin, clearly planning some kind of confrontation or worse. What Derek found instead was an empty cabin, floodlights that suddenly blazed to life, and speakers that began playing a recording of his own voice from our gym confrontation. Julia doesn't love you anymore. She told me so. But the real surprise was the audience. Lauren had invited half the neighborhood to a surprise party at the cabin, telling them it was a celebration for Derek's business success. They arrived just as Derek was stumbling around in the floodlights, confused and embarrassed. "Derek," called out Mr. Torres, our neighborhood watch captain. "What are you doing here?" "Lauren said you were inside celebrating," Derek tried to explain. "But how do you tell a group of neighbors that you were sneaking around someone else's property in the middle of the night? Especially when those same neighbors had already seen the video of you vandalizing that person's garage?" The coup de grace came when Lauren emerged from the group, carrying a box of Derek's belongings. "Since you're here," she announced loudly, "you can take your stuff. I've filed for divorce." She dumped the box on the ground, and Derek's clothes scattered across the dirt. His high school football trophies, his collection of car magazines, even his favorite coffee mug. All of it lying in the dust while our neighbors watched in fascination. "Lauren, we can work this out," Derek started. "Work what out? The affair? The lying? The property damage? Or maybe the part where you've been stealing money from our joint account to pay for hotel rooms?" Derek looked around at the crowd of neighbors, all of them staring at him with a mixture of disgust and entertainment. His face went through several shades of red before he started gathering his scattered belongings. "This isn't over," he muttered as he stuffed clothes back into the box. "Yes, it is," I said, stepping out of the woods. "It's very much over." Derek spun around, probably expecting another confrontation. Instead, he found me holding my phone, which had been recording everything. "Smile, Derek. You're about to be famous again." The video of Derek's humiliation at the cabin went viral within our social circle. By Monday morning, everyone in a 10-mile radius knew the whole story. Derek Miller, the tough guy who owned an auto shop, had been reduced to crawling around in the dirt picking up his scattered belongings while his wife divorced him in front of half the neighborhood, but Julia still hadn't learned her lesson. Even after Derek's public downfall, she continued trying to salvage their relationship. I discovered this when I found them together at her emergency open house that weekend. It was time for the final act. Julia's emergency open house was supposed to be her chance to rebuild her professional reputation. She'd spent all week preparing, cleaning the property until it sparkled, staging it with expensive furniture, and inviting every potential client she could find. What she didn't expect was for me to show up with Lauren and half our neighborhood in tow. "Nathan?" Julia's voice cracked when she saw us walking up the front steps of the colonial she was showing. "What are you doing here?" "House hunting," I said pleasantly. "Lauren's in the market for a new place since her divorce is final. I thought I'd help her look." Derek was there too, lurking in the kitchen and trying to look like a potential buyer instead of a desperate ex-lover. He'd clearly been helping Julia prepare for the showing, which meant they were still seeing each other despite everything that had happened. "This is a beautiful property," Lauren announced loudly enough for all the actual potential buyers to hear. "But I'd want to make sure it comes with full disclosure about any problems." "Of course," Julia said nervously. "The inspection report is clean, and—" "I wasn't talking about structural problems," Lauren interrupted. "I meant problems with the agent. Some people might not feel comfortable buying from someone who's been having an affair with a married man." The room went dead silent. Julia's potential clients, a young couple, an elderly man, and a woman with twin toddlers, all turned to stare at her. That's personal business, Julia stammered. Is it personal when it affects your professional judgment? I asked, pulling out my phone. Because I have documentation of weeks of lying, hotel receipts, and inappropriate behavior that suggests a pattern of dishonesty. Derek stepped forward from the kitchen, trying to salvage the situation. Look, this is between us. These people don't need to hear about our personal problems. Our personal problems? Lauren laughed. You mean the problem where you destroyed someone's property because you couldn't handle being called out for cheating? She pulled up the security footage on her own phone and showed it to the nearest potential buyer. This is the man my soon-to-be ex-husband chose to have an affair with. Does this look like someone you'd trust to handle the biggest purchase of your life? The young couple exchanged glances and headed for the door. The elderly man followed them without a word. Only the woman with the toddlers remained, but she was clearly just staying for the entertainment value. You're ruining my career, Julia hissed at me. Your career? What about our marriage? What about the 8 years I spent building a life with someone who threw it all away for a few hotel room hookups? Derek tried to play peacemaker. Maybe we should all calm down and... Shut up, Derek, I snapped. This is your fault. If you'd kept your hands off my wife, none of this would be happening. Your wife came to me, Derek shot back. She's the one who reached out. She's the one who said she was unhappy. Julia's face went white. Derek, don't what? Tell him the truth? That you've been complaining about him for months? That you said he was boring and predictable and you wished you'd never married him? The words hit like physical blows, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still stung. Is that true, Julia? I asked quietly. She couldn't meet my eyes. I was upset. I said things I didn't mean. Which things didn't you mean? The part about being unhappy, or the part about wishing you'd never married me? Both. Neither. I don't know. Tears were streaming down her face now. I was confused. You were confused, so you decided to sleep with your high school boyfriend in hotel rooms twice a week for a month? The woman with the toddlers had given up all pretense of house hunting and was openly recording everything on her phone. This was going to be all over social media within the hour. I think we should go, Derek said, grabbing Julia's arm. No, I said firmly. We're not done here. I pulled out my own phone and opened the folder where I'd been collecting evidence for weeks. Screenshots of emails, photos from the hotel, credit card records that Lauren had provided, even the video of Derek vandalizing my garage. Everyone should see this, I announced to the room. Everyone should know exactly what kind of people they're dealing with. I started reading the emails aloud. Julia's explicit messages about what she wanted Derek to do to her, Derek's responses describing their hotel room encounters in graphic detail. Julia's complaints about our marriage and her fantasies about leaving me for Derek. Stop, Julia begged. Please stop. Why should I stop? You didn't stop when you were writing these messages. Derek didn't stop when he was responding to them. Why should I stop now? By the time I finished, Julia was sobbing, and Derek looked like he wanted to disappear. The woman with the toddlers had gotten enough material to keep the neighborhood gossip mill running for months. Are you satisfied now? Derek asked bitterly. Not even close, I replied. That's when Lauren played her final card. Actually, there's something else everyone should know about Derek Miller. She pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. Financial records from his auto shop. Turns out he's been embezzling money from customer payments to fund his affair, hotel rooms, expensive dinners, even the jewelry he bought for Julia, all paid for with money he stole from people who trusted him to fix their cars. Derek's face went ashen. You can't prove that. I can, and I did. I've already turned copies over to the district attorney's office. They're very interested in your creative bookkeeping methods. The room erupted in chaos. Derek started shouting about privacy and illegal searches. Julia collapsed into a chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the disaster. The woman with the toddlers was frantically texting, probably alerting everyone she knew about the drama unfolding. But I wasn't finished yet. There's one more thing, I said, raising my voice above the commotion. Something I discovered just this morning. Everyone fell silent, waiting for the final revelation. Derek, you remember that prank in high school? The one where someone put itching powder in your gym clothes before the homecoming dance? Derek's eyes widened with recognition and growing horror. That was me. You've been obsessing over revenge against me for 20 years because I made you scratch like a flea-bitten dog in front of your date. This whole thing, seducing Julia, trying to destroy my marriage, it was never about love. It was about getting back at me for a stupid teenage prank. The truth hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Julia stared at Derek with dawning understanding. You used me, she whispered. This was all about him, not me. Derek couldn't deny it. The look on his face confirmed everything. 20 years, I continued. 20 years you've been carrying a grudge about itching powder. You destroyed 2 marriages, committed financial fraud, and ruined multiple lives because you couldn't get over a high school prank. Derek lunged at me then, finally snapping under the weight of his public humiliation. But I was ready for him. 3 years of boxing lessons paid off as I sidestepped his clumsy charge and watched him crash into the stage dining room table, sending expensive dishes flying. Security cameras are recording everything, Derek, I said calmly as he struggled to get up. Yeah, you might want to think twice about assault charges on top of everything else. Derek looked around the room, at Lauren holding her evidence folder, at Julia sobbing in her chair, at the woman with the toddlers still recording everything, at me standing calmly in the wreckage of his revenge fantasy. This isn't over, he muttered, but there was no conviction left in his voice. Yes, it is, I replied. It's completely over. Derek stumbled out of the house, leaving Julia alone with the consequences of her choices. She looked up at me through her tears, probably hoping for some sign of forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm filing for divorce, I told her simply. Lauren's lawyer is very good. I'm sure he'll handle my case too. Nathan, please. No, Julia, we're done. You made your choice when you decided Derek Miller was worth more than our marriage. Now you get to live with that choice. I walked out of that house feeling lighter than I had in months. Behind me, Julia was still crying, and the woman with the toddlers was already posting videos to Facebook. By evening, the whole story would be common knowledge throughout the city. Derek Miller's auto shop would be investigated for fraud. His marriage was over. His reputation was destroyed. And his 20-year quest for revenge had accomplished nothing except ruining his own life. Julia would have to rebuild her real estate career from scratch, assuming anyone would trust her after this. Her affair had cost her everything, her marriage, her reputation, and her future. As for me, I was free. Free from a lying wife, free from a toxic marriage, and free to start over with someone who actually deserved my trust. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people destroy themselves while you document the process. Lauren was waiting by my car, smiling for the first time since this whole mess started. Feel better? She asked. Much better. How about you? Like I can finally breathe again. She looked back at the house where Julia was presumably still cleaning up the wreckage. Think they learned their lesson? I don't really care if they did or not. That's not my problem anymore. We drove away together, leaving Julia and Derek to face the consequences of their choices alone. Justice had been served, revenge had been achieved, and the truth had finally come to light. It was exactly the ending I'd planned from the moment Julia told me her ex wanted to meet her, and I didn't need to hear the details. Some details, it turns out, are worth hearing after all.